The clock struck 3:40 a.m. at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, when a piercing phone call shattered the stillness of the night. Help. Fort Bragg. 544 Castle Drive stabbing. My wife and children need a doctor. The voice trembled, urgent and fractured. It was Captain Jeffrey MacDonald, a young Army physician and Green Beret, speaking through fear, pain, or perhaps something deeper no one could yet understand. Minutes later, military police arrived, racing down the narrow halls of the housing complex, their boots echoing in the cold pre-dawn. The door swung open to reveal a scene that would haunt anyone who saw it. A young mother, pregnant, sprawled across the bedroom floor, her body beaten and stabbed beyond recognition. Two little girls, barely awake in their tiny beds, mutilated and lifeless. And Jeffrey himself, bloodied but conscious, sitting nearby, whispering a story that seemed almost impossible to believe. According to him, it had all been done by strangers. A woman in a floppy hat, 3 drug-crazed intruders chanting cryptic words. But the apartment told a different story. No forced entry, no footprints, no evidence of anyone else. The night that began as ordinary had become a nightmare, and from this moment onward, nothing would ever be the same. Before that night, the MacDonald household was a picture of what many would call perfection. Captain Jeffrey MacDonald was a man shaped by discipline and ambition. A decorated Green Beret and Army physician, he had trained to face danger on the battlefield, yet he carried himself with a quiet confidence, the kind that commanded respect without raising suspicion. To outsiders, he was charming, intelligent, and unshakably capable. A man who could balance the demands of military life with the responsibilities of fatherhood and marriage. His wife, Colette MacDonald, was the gentle heart of the family. Soft-spoken and warm, she had a presence that could calm a room. She was intelligent, cultured, and fiercely devoted to her daughters. Colette was pregnant with their 3rd child at the time, a little boy who would never be born. Friends and neighbors often described the couple as the embodiment of young love and stability, a family thriving within the strict structure of military life, surrounded by order and discipline. Their daughters were the living embodiment of innocence and joy. Kimberly, 5 years old, was curious, bright, and full of energy, always eager to help her mother in the kitchen or play games with her little sister. Kristen, only 2, was playful, trusting, and utterly dependent on the love that enveloped her small world. Together, the girls filled the house with laughter, footsteps, and the tiny echoes of childhood that made any home feel alive. Neighbors remembered the family as warm and welcoming, the kind that left lights on for one another and shared meals over casual Sunday gatherings. They were disciplined yet affectionate, organized yet full of small, chaotic joys that only family could bring. Even the apartment itself seemed to reflect their life, neat, orderly, and calm, a sanctuary within the sprawling military complex. And yet, beneath this serene surface, the night of February 17, 1970, would tear away the facade. The very home that held comfort and safety would become a chamber of horror. The people who embodied life, love, and hope would be transformed in an instant, leaving a void that would never be filled. In the blink of an eye, the family that had once been the envy of all who knew them was about to become a tragedy that would haunt the world for decades. The night of February 17, 1970, began quietly at 544 Castle Drive, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, almost deceptively ordinary. The small apartment hummed with the faint sounds of a sleeping military base, distant engines, muffled voices, the occasional bark of a dog. Inside, Captain Jeffrey MacDonald, a 26-year-old Army physician and Green Beret, rested on the couch after a long day of duty. In the master bedroom, Colette MacDonald, 8 months pregnant, slept, weary from the routine of home and military life. In the other rooms, Kimberly, 5, and Kristen, 2, lay tucked under blankets, blissfully unaware of the darkness approaching their doorstep. According to Jeffrey's account, the quiet was shattered in the early hours. He claimed a group of intruders had entered the apartment, a woman wearing a floppy hat, 2 white men, and a black man. They moved like shadows, chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs," a line eerily reminiscent of the Manson murders just months prior. Jeffrey said he awoke to Colette's screams, lunged to protect his family, and was attacked himself, beaten, stabbed, and left unconscious amid the carnage. By the time military police arrived, the scene was nightmarish. Colette lay in the bedroom, her body battered and broken, pierced repeatedly with an ice pick and knife, her arms fractured, her blood staining every surface. Above her, in a horrifying, deliberate scrawl, was the word pig. In the next room, Kimberly's small body bore the marks of blunt trauma and stabbing wounds. Kristen, barely 2, had been stabbed 33 times, clutching at the sheets in a desperate, final struggle. The apartment, in its silent chaos, seemed almost staged, every detail frozen in a moment of horror. From the perspective of the MPs arriving at 3:40 a.m., the story Jeffrey told seemed cinematic, intruders chanting violence. Yet the apartment told another story entirely. There were no signs of forced entry, no mud, no footprints, no candle wax. Doors and windows were intact, the coffee table barely disturbed. The contrast between Jeffrey's minor injuries, a collapsed lung, small cuts and bruises, and the devastation around him raised immediate questions. Fibers from his bloodied pajama top were scattered under the bodies, hinting that he had moved among them at the time of the killings. Neighbors, awakened by the flashing lights and pounding boots of military police, later recalled a scene heavy with fear. Even from a hallway, the metallic scent of blood hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Investigators stepped inside and felt it, a tension so heavy it pressed on the chest, a silent question lingering. What really happened here? By dawn on February 17th, 3 lives were gone, 1 man remained alive, and the world had been introduced to a case that would puzzle investigators, divide families, and haunt the nation for decades. The night that began as ordinary, with the quiet breathing of a young family in a safe, ordered home, had ended in a tragedy so absolute, so incomprehensible, that it would never leave those who witnessed its aftermath. As the sun rose over Fort Bragg on February 17, 1970, the apartment at 544 Castle Drive had already begun to speak its story, one far different from what Jeffrey MacDonald had told authorities. Investigators, both military and civilian, stepped into a scene that seemed frozen in time. Blood spattered the walls, furniture, and floors, yet there were no signs of forced entry. Doors and windows were locked from the inside. The coffee table he claimed had been overturned remained mostly undisturbed. It was a house scarred by violence, yet eerily precise, a puzzle that seemed impossible to reconcile with the chaotic account Jeffrey provided. The first officers noted the inconsistencies immediately. Jeffrey's injuries were minor, a collapsed lung, small cuts and bruises. By contrast, Colette and the children had suffered horrific trauma, knife and ice pick wounds, broken bones, and evidence of desperate defensive movements. Forensic experts began piecing together what the scene suggested. Whoever had carried out the attack had intimate knowledge of the house, the layout, and the family's routines. The fibers from Jeffrey's pajama top scattered under Colette's body and in the children's rooms suggested movement among the victims during the attacks, a detail that would later become central to the case against him. Investigators also noticed odd staging elements. The word pig, scrawled in Colette's blood, evoked the Manson family murders, yet it seemed deliberate, almost performative. No candle wax, no footprints, no evidence of the intruders Jeffrey described. Even the shadows cast by streetlights revealed no traces of anyone fleeing. Each discovery added a layer of suspicion, questions that whispered through the police station and into the hearts of Colette's grieving parents. Military police faced their own frustrations. The crime scene had been partially contaminated, with early handling errors that complicated evidence collection. Officers later admitted that blood had been disturbed, items moved, and floors cleaned. In the chaos, what could have been solid proof slipped away. Still, the inconsistencies in Jeffrey's story, minor wounds, changing statements, the absence of forced entry, kept him in the investigators' sights. Amid the forensic and procedural questions, another shadow lingered. Helena Stoeckley, a local drug user who reportedly matched the description of a floppy hat woman. She was known to roam the area in the early morning hours, incoherent and unpredictable, occasionally claiming involvement in the crime. Though her accounts were unreliable and her presence never confirmed, she would become a central figure in the controversy surrounding the murders, a ghostly figure hovering over the investigation and adding fuel to debates about Jeffrey's innocence. By the end of the first day, the picture was murky. 3 lives were lost. A man sat wounded, but alive. And the authorities faced a question that would haunt the nation for decades. Was Jeffrey MacDonald a survivor telling the truth, or a man hiding the darkest secret imaginable? The investigation had only just begun, but the shadows were already closing in. In the weeks and months following February 17, 1970, the Jeffrey MacDonald case leapt from the confines of Fort Bragg into living rooms across America. As news of the murder spread, headlines painted conflicting portraits, one of a heroic army doctor attacked in the middle of the night, and another of a man whose story seemed almost too perfect, too controlled. For the public, it was a mystery, a nightmare disguised as news, and Jeffrey, with his charm and measured speech, quickly became the center of attention. Jeffrey did not stay silent. He appeared on television shows, gave interviews to newspapers, and told his story with calm conviction. He spoke of the intruders, the chanting, the brutal assault, and the unimaginable trauma of finding his family dead. Viewers watched a grieving father, bloodied and battered, recounting horrors that few could even imagine. Many believed him. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers across the country empathized with the young doctor whose life had been ripped apart. In public appearances, his composure, intelligence, and articulate storytelling earned him sympathy. He became, to some, a symbol of survival, a man who had faced death and lived to tell the tale. Yet not everyone was convinced. Colette's parents, Freddie and Mildred Kassab, initially staunch supporters of their son-in-law, began to notice inconsistencies. Small contradictions, changes in Jeffrey's recounting, and an almost clinical detachment in the way he described the scene unsettled them. What they once viewed as composure now felt rehearsed. Investigators, too, expressed skepticism. While the public saw courage and strength, the forensic reality suggested a story that did not fully align with the evidence. Jeffrey's minor wounds, the fibers from his pajama top, the lack of forced entry, all hinted at a different, darker narrative. Even among journalists and legal commentators, opinions were divided. Some framed him as the victim of a tragic, senseless crime, while others whispered that there was more beneath the surface. Psychologists would later analyze the case, pointing out the charisma and intelligence that allowed a man to craft a narrative that many would believe, even when contradictions loomed large. The media amplified this duality, hero or suspect, survivor or perpetrator, turning the story into a national debate that would not fade with time. In the court of public opinion, Jeffrey MacDonald's story was already half told. Sympathy clashed with suspicion. Grief clashed with doubt. And as the cameras rolled and newspapers printed his words, the stage was being set for a legal battle that would span decades, challenging not just the evidence, but the very way a nation defined truth, innocence, and guilt. The first steps toward justice were anything but straightforward. In 1970, the Army initiated an investigation that quickly encountered roadblocks. Jeffrey MacDonald, though the prime suspect in the eyes of investigators, was shielded by the very system that should have held him accountable. Military procedures, mismanaged evidence, and early errors at the crime scene led to the collapse of the initial case. By mid-1970, the Article 32 hearing, the military's equivalent of a preliminary court-martial review, had been convened to determine whether there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. At that hearing, the defense and prosecution clashed over critical details. Jeffrey's story of intruders and chaos conflicted with the forensic realities. No forced entry, minor injuries on Jeffrey, and blood patterns that suggested movement among the bodies. Witnesses described discrepancies in his accounts, and investigators presented evidence pointing toward staged elements. Yet, in a shocking turn, the judge ruled there was insufficient evidence to proceed with a court-martial. Jeffrey MacDonald was honorably discharged, walking away from the Army as a free man, leaving behind grieving parents, neighbors, and investigators bewildered by the collapse of justice. For the public, this dismissal was controversial. Media coverage was relentless, portraying a man both victimized by a flawed military system and shadowed by doubt. Jeffrey embraced the media spotlight, presenting himself as a survivor who had endured unimaginable loss. For many, his story was convincing. For others, it only intensified suspicion. Meanwhile, Colette's family, particularly her father, Freddie Kassab, refused to let the matter rest. He became an unyielding force, pursuing legal action to ensure the man he once trusted faced civilian justice. 9 years after the murders, in 1979, Jeffrey MacDonald finally stood trial in a civilian court. The courtroom was charged with tension. Prosecutors meticulously reconstructed the night of February 17th, presenting expert testimony, forensic analysis, and detailed blood spatter evidence. They argued that Jeffrey, frustrated by marital issues and the pressures of family life, had snapped during an argument, murdering his wife first, followed by Kimberly and Kristen. Every fiber of evidence, from the pajama fibers to the trajectory of the wounds, was laid before the jury to tell a story that contradicted Jeffrey's own version. For his defense, Jeffrey's legal team sought to cast doubt on the intruder narrative, citing Helena Stoeckley as a possible perpetrator, and emphasizing the contamination of the crime scene by Army mishandling. They highlighted his minor injuries, presenting him as a man attacked by external forces. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated and returned a verdict that shocked some, satisfied others, and ignited debates that would span decades. Jeffrey MacDonald was found guilty of murdering his wife and 2 daughters and sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. Even in that moment, the legal battle was far from over. Appeals, confessions, and contradictory testimonies would keep the case alive in courts, laboratories, and media outlets for years to come. Jeffrey MacDonald's story had moved from tragedy to courtroom spectacle, leaving the nation to wrestle with the haunting question: could a man who lost so much also have taken it all away? Even after the 1979 conviction, the story of Jeffrey MacDonald refused to end. The courtroom doors had closed, but the echoes of that night at 544 Castle Drive continued to reverberate, and the question of guilt or innocence remained alive in the public consciousness. Central to the ongoing controversy was Helena Stoeckley, a troubled young woman who would become both a witness and a phantom in the case. Helena, known in the neighborhood for her drug use and erratic behavior, eerily matched the description of the woman in the floppy hat that Jeffrey claimed had attacked his family. Over the years, she would confess involvement at times, deny it at others, and provide contradictory statements that fueled speculation but never provided definitive proof. Forensic science, too, became a battlefield. Advances in DNA testing in the 1990s and early 2000s renewed interest in evidence collected decades earlier. Investigators examined hairs and fibers, including an unidentified hair found under Kristen's fingernails. While some suggested these findings could point to an unknown intruder, courts consistently ruled that the evidence was insufficient to overturn the conviction. Helena's story died with her in 1983, leaving only fragments of doubt, tantalizing but inconclusive. Meanwhile, public opinion remained sharply divided. Supporters of MacDonald argued that the Army's mishandling of the crime scene, combined with procedural errors and early investigative failures, created a situation where reasonable doubt should have saved him. They pointed to the possibility of cult involvement, drug-fueled violence, and the limitations of forensic technology at the time. Critics, particularly Colette's family and those who studied the evidence closely, maintained that the weight of forensic details, blood patterns, fiber evidence, the lack of forced entry, and inconsistencies in Jeffrey's statements overwhelmingly pointed to him as the perpetrator. In prison, MacDonald fought relentlessly. Appeals, motions, and petitions became a lifelong occupation. Each new scientific method, each renewed legal argument became a chance, however slim, to rewrite the story of that night. The man who had once been the center of sympathy and media attention had now become a figure of obsession, a symbol of the complexity of justice, truth, and memory. Even today, decades later, the case continues to fascinate and disturb. Books, documentaries, and true crime shows explore every facet of the MacDonald saga, dissecting his words, the evidence, and the shadows left by Helena Stoeckley. 3 innocent lives were destroyed that night. One man remains alive, insisting he is a victim of circumstance, while the rest of the world wrestles with the chilling possibility that the man who claimed to survive a nightmare could also have created it. The tragedy at Fort Bragg is more than a story of murder. It is a story of uncertainty, of a system strained under human error, of grief that refuses to fade, and of a truth that remains just out of reach, haunting, unresolved, and endlessly compelling. 50 years have passed since February 17, 1970, yet the shadows of that night still stretch long over Fort Bragg, over Jeffrey MacDonald, and over everyone who dared to look too closely. 3 lives were stolen in an instant, a wife, a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, leaving grief, anger, and unanswered questions in their wake. The evidence remains debated, the memories remain raw, and the story remains unresolved in the hearts of many. Was Jeffrey MacDonald a man trapped in a nightmare he did not create, a survivor bearing the weight of an unimaginable tragedy? Or was he a man whose intellect and discipline allowed him to orchestrate the ultimate betrayal, hiding darkness behind charm and composure? Every thread, every clue, every fragment of testimony pulls us in opposite directions, leaving the truth tantalizingly out of reach. The MacDonald case is more than a tale of murder. It is a mirror held up to human nature, to grief, justice, and doubt. It forces us to ask, in a world full of shadows, how do we know who the real monsters are? If you like stories like this, then hit the subscribe button. This is True Crime Vault 360, where the past speaks, the truth breathes, and the shadows never stay silent.